Good morning and welcome to our 2021 virtual learning experiences. We're so excited to have you today. This is going to be an awesome VLE. We're going to be sharing some great stuff with you. I hope you're excited. Are you excited? Let us hear it in the chat. Come on, I want to hear some excitement in the chat. Let me hear it. All right. So we're glad that you're here. We've got a lot to go through this morning, so we're going to get right down to it. First of all, this session is being recorded, and if you missed the session or if you've got colleagues that'd like to watch the session, they can always come back to this very same link and watch the session. Please feel free to like and subscribe to our channel. We're getting close to 5,000, and we would love to have it. You guys are already in the chat over here. We've got moderators with wrenches that can answer questions, and we'll be popping up with questions and answers towards the end of our session with the Science Center. And if you don't follow us on Twitter, we would encourage you to follow us because we're actually live streaming to Twitter as well. So there's a lot going on today. So we're going to be kicking it off right now and going to our Science Center. And with us today, we have Chris from the Science Center, and he is the Director of Education, and he's a great program to show us. So Chris, I'm going to take it over to you.
All right, thank you. Good morning, everybody. So we're here at the South Florida Science Center and Aquarium, and we're going to be taking you on a quick tour just through the aquarium. There's a lot more stuff at the Science Center to see and do than what you'll see this morning, but we only have a few minutes, so we're going to focus on the aquarium part of things and show you some of the cool aquatic animals and some of the other things that are over on the aquarium side of everything. So when you first walk into the Science Center, you're going to see the front desk, and then you're going to walk in, and the aquarium is going to open up on your left, and you're going to see this really big thing right here. This is the lower jawbone of a sperm whale that was actually found right here in West Palm Beach over 40 years ago. It washed up on the shore, and they were able to save the jawbone right here and then one of the bones from the back. So this is called a vertebrae. And they were able to save those, and now we can put those on display so you can see just how big some of these animals can get. And this isn't even one of the bigger types of whales. As whales go, this is kind of like a smaller, middle-sized whale. So imagine something even like 3, 4, 5 times bigger than this, and you can see just how big some of these ocean animals can get. So once you get into the aquarium, we're going to take you on a tour of our tanks. There's over 10,000 gallons worth of fresh and salt water in our aquarium. Most of it's salt water, but we do have a little bit of fresh water. And it's all going to be fish and animals that, for the most part, you can find right here in Florida. There are a few that are exotic species or what we call invasive species that sometimes get introduced to our ecosystems and our habitats. But for the most part, what you're going to see will be stuff that you can find right here in Florida. So it's kind of like you're swimming around in the ocean right in our Florida backyard. As we go through the different tanks, you're going to see some different habitats represented. So a habitat is basically just a type of area that an animal likes to live in. So you'll see things like a deep water habitat. You'll see things like a shallow water habitat right under a dock. Like if you go out in a place that has a dock out on the water, a lot of times you'll see a bunch of things swimming around right there by the pylons. We also have a mangrove habitat, which you'll see in just a minute, which is kind of like a little nursery for baby fish. It gives them protection and it gives them somewhere to hang out so they can get a little bit bigger and be a little bit safer going out in deeper water. So Mr. Adam is our cameraman today, and he's going to be taking you around. He just waved at you. We're going to start off behind Mr. Adam over this way with one of our biggest tanks. And this represents a deep water habitat. So it's called the Shipwreck Cove, and you can see the shipwreck right there in the tank in the corner. It's a really cool kind of attention piece that some of the fish like to hide in and swim around through. But this is going to represent more of a deeper open water kind of habitat. So the fish that you're going to see in here for the most part are going to be a little bit bigger, and they're going to be able to be really strong, fast swimmers for the most part. One of the biggest fish we have in here is our porcupine puffer. And this is a really big example of a porcupine puffer. It looks like it's stuck. It's not stuck. That's just where it likes to hang out. The reason they call these puffer fish is because when they get scared, they suck in a bunch of water and they puff up like a water balloon to be more intimidating and to be harder to swallow. It's got little spikes that when it's not puffed up, they lay flat against its back. But when it does puff up, those spikes stick out and it makes it look really dangerous and tough to eat. We hardly ever see these puffers. A lot of people ask, do they ever puff up when they're in the tanks? They only puff up when they feel like they're scared or in danger. So you really don't want to see them puff up because that means they feel threatened. So our puffers, they feel nice and safe in there. So I've never personally seen one of our puffers puff up while it's in the tank, but they still have the ability to do that. So that's one of the reasons we ask people like not to bang on the tanks and stuff like that, because that can scare them. And when they do puff up, that's not always good for them. Sometimes it can hurt them a little bit when they do that. But also we have some other of our bigger fish in there. You'll see some grunts with the yellow stripes swimming by right here. This is one of our grunt fish coming around. And then on the other corner of this tank, all the way over here, one of our crowd favorites is our spotted Moray eel. He just hangs out in the corner over here. So you can't really see inside the eel's mouth as it's opening and closing its mouth. A lot of people think that it's like gasping for air, but that's how eels breathe. That's a normal behavior for them. But inside that mouth, there's these really thin needle-like teeth. So what this eel does when it wants to eat is it sits somewhere and it hides, and it waits for a fish to swim in front of wherever it's hiding, whether it's a hole in the reef or kind of like where it is now, where it's just kind of hanging out in a little pocket behind this net right here. And as the fish gets closer, it'll shoot out and grab it. And those little needle-like teeth are really good at sticking in and holding on to something when it bites down. So it doesn't have to waste a lot of energy trying to go after and chase down stuff, because once it bites on it, it's got a really good grip, and then it just pulls it back into wherever it's living, and then it can go ahead and eat it when it wants to. And then you can kind of see right next to our moray eel in this little net cave right here, we've got two of our spotted bamboo sharks, and they like to just chill on the bottom. So that's our big shipwreck tank. That's one of the biggest tanks you'll see, and it's got a lot of really great fish in there. We're going to turn back around towards the front of our aquarium and go back to a tank that we saw, but we didn't really talk about. And that's we call it the Baitball Tank. And what this represents is a behavior that fish like to do called schooling. Not like schooling like they're going to learn stuff like you guys are doing today. But when fish and other animals get together in a group like this, that's called being part of a school. And that schooling behavior, if you've ever heard the expression, there's safety in numbers, that's what that behavior is all about. If the more fish they can get, it makes a bigger, more intimidating presence in the water. And it also makes it harder to focus on just one fish. So if you're a predator coming in and you're trying to pick out one fish that you want to eat, having all those other fish swimming around is going to be very distracting, and it's going to make it hard to pick just one that you want to really go after and grab. So this is our schooling. These are Atlantic spadefish, and these are some of the fish that like to do that. You can see as they move, they all kind of like move in the same directions and try to stick close to each other. So that's our schooling tank with our Atlantic spadefish. And then we're going to move further into the aquarium. It will get a little bit darker, so it may be hard to see me, but the tanks are all lit, so you should be able to see the creatures inside them pretty easily. And the first thing I want to show you is, this is one of my favorite tanks. It's one of our smaller tanks, but it's one of my favorite ones. This is the Seahorse Corral. So a seahorse, even though they're called seahorses, they're still fish. They're a species of fish. And these guys are really good at camouflage. Camouflage means that you blend in with your surroundings. So it may be the color patterns of your skin. It may be a certain behavior that you do to be able to blend in so you can hide from things that might want to eat you. So if you look really closely, you'll start to see these seahorses kind of appear a little bit. They're really good at blending in. There's one right down here at the bottom. And you can see their tails like to grab onto stuff. Their tails are what are called prehensile. That means they can control them kind of like your fingers, so they can wrap them around stuff. And they like to anchor onto things like this staghorn coral. And that keeps them in one place. If there's a current and the water is flowing really quickly, they can stay in one spot. They don't have to use a lot of energy to swim around. This other one that Mr. Adam is kind of zooming in on now, you can see the camouflage is working really well. it's almost the exact same color and kind of texture of the coral behind it. So it blends in really easily. And if it wasn't moving around like it is now, it'd be a lot harder to see. Another interesting thing about seahorses, you may already know, but in seahorses, the males are the ones who carry the babies. So when the female is ready to have babies, she lays her eggs in a pouch on the male seahorse's front, and that's where the babies start to grow and develop. So that's one of the few species of animals in the entire world that actually has the male that carries the babies until they're ready to be born. So those are our cool little seahorses. And then next to them, these little guys right here, these are called the jewels of the sea. And these are some really bright, colorful fish. We have things like this little bright blue chromis over here. We've got some angelfish, some butterfly fish in there. And these are the really pretty fish you're going to see kind of on the coral reefs. So if you go out a little bit offshore in Florida, we've got some really great areas where people like to go scuba diving and snorkeling because they've got this stuff called coral. And coral itself is an animal. It looks like a plant, but it's actually a special kind of animal. And these are the fish that kind of live and feed off the different parts of the coral and the different organisms that call the coral reef their home. So that coral reef is super important to these animals and a lot of other animals that feed on these guys. As the coral grows, it actually makes a hard skeleton, and then it'll grow bigger and bigger and bigger a little bit each year. And over a really long time, that makes a really large skeleton that you see right here that these coral live on. And that gives room for other fish to hide out. It gives them protection from bigger fish. And it just makes an area where lots of animals can take advantage of these nice big coral formations. So that's why corals are super important to our ecosystem, to our environment. And you'll hear a lot about protecting and preserving coral because the coral, even though it's got a rocky skeleton and it seems like it should be really durable, it's actually kind of a sensitive organism, and small changes like a little bit of a rise in the temperature of the sea can cause problems for our corals. Chemicals from your sunscreen and stuff like that can also cause problems for the corals. So if you hear about coral conservation, these are the types of animals that they're talking about that are really, really important for our oceans, and especially in Florida for our waters right off the coast. So from here, I'm going to have Mr. Adam turn around. And this is one of the favorite tanks in our aquarium. It's called the pop-up tank. And I'll show you why it's called the pop-up tank. Because you can go inside, you can pop up inside the fish, and you can be in the water with all the animals. So that's the pop-up tank. And that's got a lot of the same animals as our jewels of the sea, a lot of the really colorful coral reef fish. You'll see some more angelfish in there, some really beautiful butterfly fish in that tank as well. You'll see some tangs. So if you're a fan of the movie Finding Nemo, you like Dory, this is a Pacific blue tang, which was what Dory was. So you'll see those in there as well. And then we'll move on over to this tank right here. So I mentioned we have some different habitats in our aquarium. This one represents kind of more man-made habitat. So if there's a boardwalk or a pier or something like that, where people have built a little walkway over the water, that walkway has to be supported by something, right? Those big wooden or concrete pylons. And even though it's man-made, it can still offer some protection and some living space for some sea animals. So this is an environment that has been created artificially by people, but fish can still take advantage of that. So you can see we've got some little spadefish in there. There's a little porcupine puffer swimming through the ladder right up here. Not quite as big as the other one. So again, this is kind of like what you would see if you went out to a regular pier or regular boardwalk. So just right off the water, right off the beach, you can see a lot of these really cool creatures. A lot of these animals are right there in the water, and we don't even recognize that they're right there a lot of times. Let's see. Let's go over to, real quickly, As we're on our way to the freshwater part of our aquarium, we'll show you 2 honorary aquarium members. So these animals aren't sea creatures. They don't live in the water, but they have found a home in our aquarium because people really like to see these animals, and they've been part of our education program for several years. And we found that this was the best place to show them off and for people to be able to see them. But we've got in this little tank right here is Rose. Rose is a rose hair tarantula. And we've actually had Rose for, I think, close to 8 years. So she just keeps on keeping on. And what's really cool about Rose, I don't know if I should tell this story or not, but at one point, after one of the hurricanes came in and we were getting stuff set back up, we put Rose in a tank in the corner, and then the person who was supposed to feed Rose forgot about Rose for about 3 months. So we said, oh no, Rose, we haven't fed Rose in like 3 months. And we went back and fed her a cricket, and she was doing just fine. So we looked it up, and it turns out that these animals can actually go as long as a year or so without food. They're really good at surviving and adapting to harsh conditions. So luckily we were able to make sure Rose was put back on a more regular feeding schedule, and she's super healthy now and doing just fine. And she's still with us today. And then right next to Rose, we have Jane, the ball python. So ball pythons are snakes, but they're not venomous. So if they bite you, they won't inject any venom, and they won't make you sick or anything like that. But a python is called a constrictor. That means it incapacitates its prey by squeezing it until it can't breathe anymore, and then it can just eat it whenever it needs to. So Jane is a smaller ball python. She's getting bigger and bigger. She's still pretty young. We've had her for about 3 years now. And a fun fact about Jane is when we first got Jane, we thought she was a girl. So we named her Jane, and it turns out Jane may actually be a boy. So just goes to show you, if you have a snake or something that you're getting from the pet shop and they tell you it's a boy or a girl, you might want to check with your vet and see if they can confirm that for you. So that's Jane, our ball python. And Jane just recently shed. So as snakes get bigger, their skin isn't quite as stretchy and elastic as ours is, so it doesn't grow as well with them. So they have to shed that outer layer the bigger they get, so they have room to grow into their new skin. And then we'll take a quick look at our freshwater tanks. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out some of the animals and show you a couple of the animals that we have here in our aquarium. So over here is our freshwater tank, one of our bigger freshwater tanks. So these are going to be the animals that you see in maybe like a freshwater lake or canal. And one of our more popular fish right here, this is called a pacu fish. And that pacu fish right there was donated to us. It was about 3/4 of that size when we got it. So since we've gotten it, it's gotten even bigger than it was before. But this is one of our biggest freshwater fish that we have in our aquarium. All right, so last thing I'm going to show you before we take out some animals is our mangrove tank. And our mangrove tank, I mentioned before, alarm's going off. I mentioned before that a mangrove is a special place for fish. When fish are born, just like when people are born, they start out a lot smaller than they will eventually be. And when you're a really small fish, there's a lot of other big fish that might want to eat you, right? So you need a safe place to stay for a little while until you can get big enough that you can take care of yourself, or until you can get fast enough to outrun predators, things like that. And these mangroves are where a lot of fish do that. This is where they take the opportunity when they're small, when they're younger, to hide until they can get to be a little bit bigger. So this is a nice little nursery space for a lot of different fish. You can see a lot of small fish swimming among the roots. But not only are these mangroves really good for fish, they're also really good for people as well, because you can see how those roots dig down deep into the sand. Well, when we get things like hurricanes that come through and we get big waves that move in and out, a lot of times that can wash away tons and tons of sand. And if there's nothing holding it in place, we can lose a lot of our land area next to the beach. So a lot of that sand gets taken away, and we lose places for the plants and the animals to live. Well, these mangroves with their roots dug deep into the sand, they help keep that sand where it is so that we don't lose too much of it when those storms come through. So not only are they helping the fish, but they're also helping us out as well. So real quick, I'm gonna have Miss Selena go grab one of our alligators for you to see. And while she's doing that, I'll show you some of our creatures that live in our touch tank. We'll go over here. So inside of our touch tank, we have some Atlantic stingrays. We're not going to touch those. But what we can touch are some of our invertebrates. Invertebrates are animals without backbones. And we're going to look at a special type of invertebrate called an echinoderm. An echinoderm is an animal that has bumpy or spiky skin. And the one that I'm going to show you real quickly is called a sea urchin. This particular one is called a Pincushion Sea Urchin. You can see all the little spikes on it are moving around. So they can move these spikes individually. They can move them one at a time, or they can move them all together. They can move them in all different directions. And it's a defense mechanism. So if you see something really spiky, you probably don't want to put it in your mouth, right? But that's also kind of how they move around. They can use their spikes to help them crawl across the ground. If those spikes aren't doing the job, they have down the middle of each row, you can see a little line that goes down. Well, inside that line, there's these little holes, and out of those holes come these little tiny, they look like little hairs almost. Those are called tube feet, and they're like thousands of little suction cups that let our sea urchin grab onto stuff. So whether it's food that it wants to grab onto, or whether it's trying to help it move around, that's another way that they can move around. If you look really closely at our sea urchin, you probably won't see a nose because they don't have one. They don't have eyes, so you won't see those either. They don't have ears. And you don't even see a mouth because the mouth is on the bottom of our sea urchin. So right in the center, you can see the little mouth and those 5 white little wedges. Those are actually the teeth of our Pincushion Sea Urchin. You see them right in the middle there. So as they're crawling along, when they find something they want to eat, they actually crawl over it, and their teeth just go chomp, 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 and they eat whatever it is they're going to eat. These guys like to eat a variety of things. They'll eat algae, seaweed, whatever they kind of find laying on the ground. So they are opportunistic feeders. That means whatever they come across, they'll eat it. And what's also kind of interesting about these animals, if you see them out in the wild, a lot of times they'll have shells and stuff kind of stuck to them. That's on purpose. It's not, they didn't just have a shell like fall on them and it got stuck. They'll drag those pieces of shell on top of them like a hat. So just like a hat protects you from too much sun and keeps you from getting sunburned, these animals that live kind of in the shallower areas that get a lot of sunlight during the day, sometimes they don't want quite so much sun. So they'll bring that piece of shell or seaweed or whatever is on top of them. So it acts like a little shade for them, but it also is kind of like a little bit of camouflage as well. So we'll put that in there. And then Miss Selena has our next guest. And this is one of our freshwater animals. This is our little alligator. It's got wiggles because it's been sitting out in the sun. So it's warming up nice and warm. Yeah. So this is a female alligator, and this is a juvenile. So juvenile means that this alligator is not quite a baby anymore, but it's not quite full grown. Yeah, I know. It's not very happy right now. But I wanted to show you this alligator real quickly because it's a great example of some really cool animals that we have right here in Florida that are not really living in a lot of other places. We see these alligators. This is an American alligator. And we see these in the southeast part of the United States. So Florida, Georgia, Louisiana, you're going to see a lot of them. But outside of the southeastern part of the United States, you don't see these animals a lot. When you see them full grown out in the wild, they're a dark kind of brownish green color. But you can see this juvenile has some white stripes. And that's another example of camouflage. We talked about camouflage with the seahorses, how it helps them blend in. When these alligators are smaller, they're still they're still prey items at that point. There are still a lot of things that are bigger that could eat them. So it helps them out if they can hide a little bit. Another thing that helps these animals is their eyes. If you look closely at their eyes, you'll see they're kind of sitting up on top of their head. So an alligator is called an ambush predator. That means it's going to sit and wait, kind of like we talked about with the eel, where it doesn't want to spend a lot of energy trying to catch something. It would prefer if something comes to it and it can just grab it whenever it gets in range. So the alligator, with those eyes on top of its head, if it doesn't want to pull its whole body out of the water, it can just stick its little eyeballs up above the surface and it can see what's going on, see if there's anything that it wants to eat without having to expose its whole body and scare something that's going to be around it. So that's our little juvenile alligator. And these are about, we've had these for about 10 months. And we get them from a place called Gatorland over in Palmdale, Florida. So these are actually getting pretty big for our tanks. So we'll probably be going over there pretty soon to get some smaller ones. We'll take these back and we'll swap them out for some smaller animals that are a little more size for our tanks. So that is our tour of the aquarium. If you guys have any questions, I think you've been putting some questions in the chat and they're going to let me know if you have some questions that I can answer for you. I'm going to hand this back off to Miss Selena. Thank you, Miss Selena. Yeah.
That's great. We've got tons of questions for you, Chris. So hopefully we're going to get all these answered.
Yeah.
So we're going to start from back at the beginning. And it's like this one right here came from Kate. How did you get the animals in the tank?
Okay, that's a really good question. So some of the animals we buy from, pet stores, from aquarium stores, just like you can go and get fish for your home. But a lot of the bigger fish, sometimes our aquarium people, they'll actually go out and they have a special license that allows them to go out and collect fish and other animals from the water right around us. So they can, a lot of times with our urchins and things like that, they'll actually go out and go diving and bring these animals in from the actual waters around us. So it's a little bit of both.
Okay. This one's for you, Mr. Chris. How did
Okay.
Mr. Chris become interested in science? And that came from Chloe.
That is a great question. So this is actually the place that got me interested in science. I grew up here in West Palm Beach, so a long time ago when I was younger. I came here on field trips and saw all the cool stuff that they had back then. And since then, it's gotten really bigger. So it's been cool to see that. But seeing places like the Science Center and just being able to experiment and find out things, most of being a scientist is just being curious and trying to find answers to stuff. So that's how I got my start, was seeing places like this that allowed me to know that there was a way that you can be curious for a living, which is really cool. And then in school, I decided to major in science, and that brought me here.
Okay. We've got a question here from Declan. How big can pufferfish get?
How big can the pufferfish, like the one that we saw in the other tank? That's about as big as they're going to get. So maybe like 2 feet long from nose to tail, and about that size that our porcupine puffer was over there. That's pretty much as big as they get.
Okay. So the next question is from Riley. She wants to know, are there any endangered species in the tank?
Are there any endangered species in the tank? So off the top of my head, probably one of the more endangered species that we have are alligators. Alligators were listed as an endangered or threatened species as early back as about 20 years ago, because people like to hunt them for sport and also for their meat and their skin to make leather and purses and handbags and things like that. And there was actually a lot of work that went into saving the alligator populations and making sure they didn't go extinct. So right now, technically, the alligator is doing pretty well. It's still considered an endangered species because the alligator looks a lot like the American crocodile. And the crocodile that lives here in South Florida, this is one of the only places you'll find those alligators and the crocodiles in the same place. And those crocodiles are really endangered. So because it's really hard to tell them apart easily, they kept the alligators on the endangered list just so people didn't get confused and accidentally take the wrong ones when they're doing their hunting and stuff like that. So our alligators are still technically on the endangered and threatened list. And then some of our little sharks in there as well. Sharks get a really bad rap. Bad reputation in the ocean world as being these really mean, mindless eating machines. And really, there's a lot more danger to sharks from people than there is the other way around. So sharks are constantly being hunted and fished out of the waters faster than they can reproduce. So sharks are one of the more endangered species in the ocean as well.
All right. Here's a question from LJ. How do you feed the animals in the tanks?
That is also a really good question. So, Mr. Adam, if you can kind of peek back behind the tank for a second. So behind all these tanks, Mr. Adam's going to show you, there's a walkway behind everything, and there's these little ladders and there's stands back there. So our aquarium people, what they actually have to do is they climb up on top of these tanks with buckets of food, and they feed the fish. Some of the fish, they can just drop the food in, and all the fish will kind of share equally. But some of them, they actually have to do what we call target feed, which means they grab these big, long grabbers, and they'll take a piece of food and put it right in front of a specific fish to make sure that each fish gets as much food as it needs.
All right. Kobe wants to know if the eel is electric.
The eel is not electric. Most of the eels that I know of that are electric are freshwater eels. And this guy in our tanks is a saltwater eel. Also, we probably wouldn't want to keep an electric eel in a tank with a bunch of other fish, just in case. We wouldn't want those fish to get hurt.
That makes sense. All right. Here's a question from Vinny. How many seahorses are in the tank?
That is a really good question, and it's one that I don't actually know the answer to. Because they're so good at hiding, sometimes it's hard to actually count all the seahorses that are in there. I think we have 4 or 5 in there right now, but again, trying to get them all and see them all at the same time is kind of hard.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, here's a good question from Christian. What predators eat seahorses?
So anything that is bigger than our seahorses, a lot of times we'll be able to eat them. So you'll have things like our bigger, if you remember in the big shipwreck tank, we had some larger tanks or some larger fish. We used to have a barracuda in there. So fish like the barracuda, like big jacks, eels, sharks. So pretty much anything that's bigger than that seahorse that is a meat eater will be able to eat that seahorse.
All right. Here is a question from Thalia. How many eggs does a seahorse mother lay at one time?
That is also a really good question. Let me ask Miss Selena. She's one of our aquarium people over here. She may be able to give you a better answer than I can at that. I know they're like probably around 100 or 200, but we'll have to ask Miss Selena. Miss Selena. She's talking to somebody real quick. Miss Selena, do you know how many eggs a seahorse lays and how many eggs the male seahorse carries in its pouch on average?
I'm not sure. That's a great question.
That is a great question. So the nice thing about being in science is that there's always going to be questions that you just don't know the answer to, but you can always look it up because somebody probably knows the answer.
Yeah.
And that's one of the bigger things to learn if you're going to be doing science is sometimes you have to go find those answers.
Yeah, it's a good research question.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next question. Is what was the name of the big fish in the pop-up tank?
I did ask my director. She knows a little bit more than
Okay,
I do.
we may have an answer for you about the seahorse eggs.
Yeah,
Oh.
About 80 to 150.
80 to 150 eggs on average. And that came from our aquarium director who's behind the scenes. So, like I said, if you don't know the answer, a scientist knows who to ask. And
That's right.
The big fish in the pop-up tank, Adam, follow me to pop-up tank, which I'm assuming is this one right here. This is a type of angelfish. It's called a French angelfish.
French angelfish. Okay.
Yep. Some people call it a rock angelfish as well. So it might have a couple different names that it goes by.
All right. I lost my place in my questions. All right. Here's a good question. How do sea urchins give birth?
Sea urchins lay eggs. So a lot of things in the ocean lay eggs, and sea urchins are one of those. They'll lay their eggs. That kind of most of the time they'll try to put them in a protected area, and they'll stick them to something like a piece of seaweed or something that's growing on the bottom of the ocean, and then the eggs hatch, and that's a whole new group of baby sea urchins.
Okay. Let's see. Let's see here. What is the largest animal you've had?
The largest animal that we've ever had in our aquarium was probably one of our nurse sharks. So in that big shipwreck tank that we showed you at the beginning, we had some smaller sharks in there, but at a few different points in the several years of the Science Museum's history, we've had some nurse sharks, and those nurse sharks out in the wild, they can get pretty big. So we actually had a nurse shark that was donated to us that was already a pretty good size, and it grew and grew and grew, and eventually it was just too big for our tanks. So we had to take it out, and to get the nurse shark out, it was about almost 4 feet long at that point, so probably about this long. And at that point, it was up to almost 100 pounds. Our aquarium director had to actually stand inside the tank, like climb over the wall and get in the tank, and basically had to wrestle that shark out of the tank. So there was a lot of splashing, a lot of sloshing that day, but we eventually got it out, and it has a new home. It's up at one of the FAU research institutes up a little further north in Florida, where they have this nice big actual natural estuary bay area where it can swim around.
Okay. Here's an interesting question. Do any of the fish get into fights?
They do occasionally, and if we take a look at our touch tank, you'll see there's a divider right here, and that's because our sea urchins and things over here, some of the fish on the right side, we're kind of picking on them, so they got moved over to the other side where they were a little safer. Our stingrays tend not to bother them, but occasionally, just like in life, you know, other fish will pick on other fish, and we'll try to either separate them, or sometimes that's a sign that maybe this fish isn't getting quite enough food, so we'll make sure we feed it a little more. So there's ways to solve those problems, just like in real life. If people are fighting, there's ways to separate them and make sure everybody's happy.
Gotcha. All right, here's another good question. What happens when the fish die?
That's a great question, and that's something, unfortunately, that happens. In any aquarium, you're going to have fish that just get old or get sick or something like that. So our aquarium directors and our aquarium staff, they come in a little bit earlier each morning. They check all the tanks, make sure all the fish are healthy. And if they see anything out of the ordinary, if they see a fish that looks like it's sick or struggling to swim or something like that, they'll take the sick fish and they'll take it back to our, it's called a quarantine tank. So quarantine means you're keeping that fish kind of separate, and they'll try to get that fish better, give it some medicine, give it some special food if they need to. And if they can't, if the fish is already dead, they'll take it out. And a lot of times they'll study that fish a little bit to see if they can figure out exactly why that fish died, so that if there's something wrong in the tank, then it won't be a problem for the other fish that are living there as well.
All right. We've got some great questions here. How big can a dockfish get?
How big can a dockfish get? Like the fish that live under the docks, I'm guessing?
That's what I'm just guessing, yeah.
Okay. And those dockfish, the ones in our tank, are going to stay pretty small just because it's a smaller tank. We don't want to have them be crowded or anything like that. But under a real dock, you may see sharks, like nurse sharks, as big as 5 feet long, just hanging out under there. So as long as there's nothing really blocking off that dock from open water, those bigger fish are free to swim in, and sometimes they like to snack on the smaller fish that live around there.
Okay. We got one more question for you.
Okay.
We've still got tons of questions, but this is going to probably be the last one we're going to do. A student would like to know if you have any animals that have been rescued in your Science Center aquarium.
Any animals that have been rescued? Rescued animals. I don't believe we have any rescued animals. We do have some donated animals. So some animals that people had in their home aquariums and were just too big or got too much for them to take care of, rather than just leaving them in a bad situation. We're able to take those. So it's kind of like a rescue, but it's not necessarily that the animal was taken from a really dangerous environment. It's just that the people recognized that they weren't able to care for it properly, so they brought it to us to be able to do that.
Great. Okay, Chris, we're going to bring you back in a few minutes. We're going to kind of close things out with a few announcements, and then we're going to bring it back to you to say the last words.
Okay.
So bear with us for a few minutes, and we'll bring you back up in just a few seconds. So this week, we've got some great different programs for you. Tomorrow, we've got 2 sessions from the Norton Museum, one at 9:30 from K to 5, and one from 10:30 from 6 to 12. Thursday, we've got 2 great sessions. We're going to have Fayetteville Vision Studios Creativity Tour at 9:30, and then we have Palm Beach County Library for secondary students at 10:30. Those are our remaining week, and we wanted, if you save the dates, we're going to have a back-to-school tech talk on July 29th at 9 o'clock. We're going to send out more details hopefully this week and get that out to you. And then also, we're so excited about having the District Technology Conference. We have a date. Mark your calendars. Registration is going to start when school starts back in August. It's going to be October 15th, and it's going to be virtual this year. So we're going to have some great things for that. We're very excited about going to that virtual environment. And I think that's it. Tasha, is that it? Oh, yes. So we from the Ed Tech team, training team, would like to thank you for joining us. And on behalf of the whole team at Ed Tech, we're very thankful that you're here to join us. And I'm going to bring Chris back up and let him kind of say the final word. Thank you, Chris, for being here with us today.
Of course. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today as well. Last couple things I'll mention is we are open for business this entire summer. So weekdays 9 to 5, weekends 10 to 6. We've got a really great dinosaur exhibit right now. It's called Dinosaur Revolution, and it's a dinosaur maze, where as you make your way through our exhibit, you'll see a lot of cool interactive things that talk about dinosaurs and prehistoric animals. We've also got our planetarium and a bunch of other stuff to see here at the Science Center. If you can't come visit us in person, you can definitely check out our YouTube channel. You'll see a lot of great videos, kind of like this one right here, where we showcase some of our different areas in the Science Center. You'll see some cool science experiments that you can try at home. Check out our TikTok channel, which we're just getting up and running. And if you want to follow us and see some different events and things like that that are coming up this summer, you can check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We're on all of those as well, just for SF Science Center on all of those social media outlets.
Thanks, Chris. It was a great audience and great questions, and it's a great experience. Thank you for being here with us, and we wish everyone a great day.
Thanks, everybody.